type of company, or from revenue point of view, is more agile and eager to implement changes? 100 million or 500 million revenue?
I think 500 million. I think a little bit bigger tends to mean that we have a leadership team that is in a little less of a typical firefighting mode, that they tend to be thinking a little bit more about long-term durability of the business, long-term moat and competitive advantage.
Points. Like what's 80% of pain points that you come across with construction companies?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's rooted a little bit in envy, right? So you think about the ego that exists in a typical person, right? Especially a C-suite leader.
Do you and your team learn about construction tech and technology in general?
I certainly have the, privilege to get to fly around and spend a lot of time with conferences and talk to founders who are interesting and who are exploring the outer edges of these things. But YouTube is a pretty fabulous resource for folks that can't, easily get on a plane and don't have access to senior leaders inside of the coolest firms.
How is technology actually used in AEC? In corporate innovations, we explore the innovation and implementation procedures used by those who actually use the tech on a day-to-day basis. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology, and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
Good afternoon, Ryan. So just before we hit record, you gave us a rather splendid introduction to you and what you do. But you said and promised you would keep it more concise. So with that, take it away.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you guys for having me on. I've been a long time listener, first time caller onto the show. I live in Chicago, Illinois. I'm a partner at WipFli, and WipFli is a CPA and consulting firm. So spend a lot of time with CFOs and the leader of the financial and technology teams inside of construction firms across the United States, and some that operate outside of the United States over on your side of the pond as well. So, really passionate about construction technology, passionate about the built environment, love to spend time on job sites and thinking about and kind of making happen the future as it relates to efficiency, right? Robotics, AI, all of the things that we want to get to, but then definitely spend a lot of time focused on the boring bits that are the blocking and tackling, trying to just solve some really today pain points that exist for a typical mid-sized construction firm.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit more about WipFli, like how big you are, guys, and what type of customers do you usually work with?
Yeah, why the hell are you involved with construction tech?
WipFli's always been really organized around the specific industries that we serve. And those industries are industries beyond construction as well. But construction and real estate is one of the biggest niches that we focus on. And so for the majority of my career, I've been exclusively focused on construction and real estate and kind of the mid-size of the market. So pretty much everybody except for those top few biggest firms, and everybody except for the shops that are just a few people in size, right? But the 50 to 1,000 people tend to have relatively similar sets of pain points with their technology. They're on stuff that's on premises, that isn't talking, that is overloaded and being stretched, and they tend to be a little bit light on technology team members, right? There might be one or two or three people focused on technology, and one's focused on field tech, and one's kind of focused on the financial system, and it isn't always particularly coordinated. And so when we get involved and start bringing analytics and a real focus on data quality, but then also data culture and data curiosity is something that I hope we can talk a lot about today as kind of like inputs into how somebody that's in a leadership position at a construction firm actually can advance this idea of AI, helping them be more efficient. That's what me and my team spend a lot of time on.
So do these people have usually innovation departments within their businesses, or quite opposite, they don't have at all?
I would say that's pretty uncommon. There is really often a function called construction excellence or operational excellence. And in my experience, what that department or function is a response to the fact that IT isn't getting it done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it tends to be the case that the financial director, to use your terminology, or the CFO is responsible for the technology that exists inside of the organization, getting it upgraded, keeping it maintained, making the decisions on what next thing is going to be prioritized or procured. And then there's a person or two or three, or 10 that work for them that keep that technology running. But we know that construction companies are building things, right? So there's people in the field that have needs beyond just the financial system and the accounting that is kind of keeping track of how we're doing in job costing. And so what tends to be the case is that the field leadership, the operations leadership will make a hire. They'll create a job posting for a director of construction technology or director of operations excellence. And that person tends to have an expertise in BIM and VDC and drones. I joke like that person's then 9 to 5 tends to be flying the drone around the job site. And I mean, and it's adding value. Don't get me wrong. Where I see massive opportunity, and I've written an ebook series on this that we'll find a way to link to, is getting that construction technologist in the field, collaborating with the CFO and the IT leadership to build a single data environment to think about how their systems and their processes are connected and kind of span that gap. And they're all working on this. They're all trying, right? But there isn't a high functioning innovation department inside of these organizations that are advancing that goal. That's where my team and me tend to get called in and kind of inspire a sense of continuous improvement that we then work for sometimes years with organizations to get to a better end state for.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, when we first met, you described it very well that you focused on, say you take the ENR 400 or whatever it is, you focus on everything below number 50. Was that right?
Yeah. And I mean, even that there are many in the top 10 that we're serving, but in terms of who really needs our help because they don't have that, that innovation department or that technology function that's really effective themselves, folks under the number 50 tend to be under $1 billion in revenue or right around that $1 billion in revenue mix. And they tend to be really hungry and tend to be experiencing this thing where employees have options, right? I mean, like we know that, there are different economic indicators, but realistically, like good talent is tending to not have too hard of a time finding a great company to work for. And so if we just all think about our day-to-day experience as employees in a company, like the tools that we have at our disposals really, really matters. If we're on a job site and we've got old, outdated construction equipment that's constantly in need of repair and that isn't comfortable and that's, noisy, right? These are all things that we continue to evaluate compared to an organization that's going to offer us a new truck that, is well maintained. And so when we think about our technology tools experience, there's so many PMs that I know that join a new company. They've got a fabulous financial package. They're really excited about the culture and the brand. And then their experience is one where to get a report on their job cost and the financial performance of their job, they need to open their laptop, get onto a VPN, launch a remote desktop, load a report server, wait a long time for that report to render and load and pull down the relevant data. And then the data is weeks out of date anyway. So like they didn't, and their whole job is to ensure that they're keeping an early warning set of signs and indicators front and center so that if something is going wrong from a schedule or budget perspective or a quality or safety perspective, they can correct it sooner than later. But if you don't have the information as a project manager, your hands are tied. You can't do what you're there to do. And frankly, you're compensated to be doing. So they start to tend to get frustrated and give. And I've seen this over and over. Leadership, if they've got the kind of gravitas and relationship with leaders, a little bit of an ultimatum to say, hey, I'm up for helping bring what I experienced in my prior life to this organization by pushing some of these upgrades through. Or I'm going to be forced to be looking for an organization that's a little bit more on top of the more modern tools, like, dashboards that just work on my phone, that have data that's updated in real time, and where when I play with tools like ChatGPT, or when I see things from Boston Dynamics or Figure that are these kind of robotics that are depending on data that, of course, are locked away in our old systems, like, I can't picture our firm, effectively adopting those modern tools, because we've got so much tech debt, so much baggage that we need to get dealt with. And so just like, just those basic hygiene elements that we all have across all elements of our job and our life, like, we got to stay on top of making sure that our systems are in the cloud, and that they're connected, and that our data is all in one place, and that we're being thoughtful about the hygiene of all of those things to be able to adopt what comes around the corner. Like, right, you guys interview a lot of people on this show that are bringing cool new things to the mix, and you can't always just grab those off the shelf if your basic bits are too old.
I think it's worth highlighting this point that you made, and about attracting and retaining talent, because it's something that we don't really actually ever really talk about or come across on the podcast. Is, you might think you want to innovate for other reasons, but one thing you're probably not considering is, how do you attract the best and greatest talent? And that is perhaps by you doing some of the things that you just mentioned, Ryan.
Yeah, so many companies like put a foosball table in their office, right? And they do cool events, and those things matter a lot too, right? I mean, paying, right? I mean, there's
we had DJ
all those
booths
things
before, by the way.
I heard that. Shout out to Building Connected on that one. So, there's a lot to employee engagement, and we all know when we've got that one application or a slow computer that IT is not tending to, and then you can't operate at the speed of thought because there's this IO problem between your applications and your tools and what you're actually trying to accomplish. And then what happens is, and this is another one of those kind of ebook topics, is this is how shadow IT starts to emerge, is get my own laptop, I get my own ChatGPT subscription, I get my own app, and now all of a sudden we're operating outside of the environment that the broader organization is going to be able to benefit from, right? People start to go rogue. They find ways to be efficient because everybody wants to do a great job. So it's important that organizations stay on top of the needs of their people.
I'm very curious of what's the typical set of pain points? What's 80% of pain points that you come across with construction companies?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's rooted a little bit in envy, right? So you think about the ego that exists in a typical person, right? Especially a C-suite leader. And construction firms, they're not as competitive with one another as you might always think. I mean, sometimes there's two general contractors in the same market that are not going to join the same peer group, but people in the same trade that operate in different geographies, or people in different trades that exist in the same market, tend to band together in peer groups. And these are facilitated, and they spend time in person, and they spend time sharing their relevant and overlapping challenges. And so, I think that's the root sometimes more often, right? It's kind of hard to understand the water that you're swimming in if it's just like a little bit suboptimal. But somebody will show up, right? A new employee will show up saying, hey, I've got this experience elsewhere that was better in this regard. Or another leader in a peer group saying, hey, here are some investments that we've recently made that have been paying dividends. And so like a perfect example of a pain point beyond what I talked about with like loading the spreadsheet servers, like, let's just think about like project management. Like, so many of the respected firms that we all know have a folder in an on-premise file server with all of the project documents, and a lot of Excel files being emailed back and forth with regard to project updates, versus what I think a lot of us probably picture, which is like this, this online consolidated platform where we log in and everybody's got an immediate bit of visibility into the status of a project, the financial health of a project, the open items. And then that's not even to mention, like, we're talking about the complexities of making 5 or 10 people inside of a single organization collaborate. But construction isn't ever a single organization working, right? You've got the owner and the developer, right? Whoever the client is, whether that's in the public sector or private. And then you've got the general contractor, you've got all the subcontractors, and then material suppliers. So that is just a highly decentralized business process. And we all know what tools are popular out there that are telling stories about how those things get brought together. But it's easier said than done. You frankly can't write a check to solve any of these problems. If you could, most of the firms would do it, right? They have written a check to try and solve the problem, but there is some curiosity and culture and work that needs to be done on the talent to actually move that needle forward. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is helping get everybody on the same page about why, what that better future looks like, how that's actually tied to the organization strategy, right? So it's not just about like technology strategy and technology for technology's sake, but like, there's your org strategy. There's where you're trying to go. Here's how we've linked technology to it. Now, here's the specific technology initiatives we need to get organized around. And here's how we get our people motivated to all row in that same direction together, knowing that these things can fail, not necessarily through fire and flames, right? Like, oh, wow, like that, caused us a big problem, but rather they run out of steam because these things need to be organized in a way that is more like a marathon than it is like a sprint.
So do you have like organization goals you mentioned, and then you try and connect the technology to those goals and then the people and the talent around that?
Yeah, I mean, one example I can think of along those lines was, so this is a problem that only emerges at points in time, but it tends to be a top line revenue problem, right? A demand problem. So post COVID, many countries were in a position where there was more demand than there was supply, meaning your problem was always labor shortages, worker shortages, not
material.
How do I get enough business to keep my people busy? But a little bit more recently, interest rates getting more challenging globally. And all of a sudden now, there's like intentional effort by the federal government in the United States, especially to cool demand. Now people need to fight a little bit harder for projects. There isn't every week a brand new organization setting up shop saying, hey, we're a general contractor with good people that came, and went off on their own from reputable firms that, right, perfectly qualified to do it, but more competition. So a little bit less competition, but less projects to be competing for. All of a sudden now, you've got organizations that are focused again on business development. And I had a client one time that said, we in our strategic plan are trying to ensure that we have this culture of business development instantiated where everybody feels a sense of ownership over bringing in project work, right? Over doing good by our clients, right? Good client service leading to them getting callbacks, to them getting more invitations to bid or advanced kind of requests for budgetary quotes on a job. And that's where, a CRM system, right? Like a Salesforce or Dynamics or HubSpot or a lot of the construction specific CRMs would get brought into the mix. And that's actually like the business application that I came from, like my experience. And then we started to make those CRM systems go a lot deeper beyond that pre-construction and bidding and estimating phase and financial projections into the actual delivery and management of the project and the setup in the financial system. And now, of course, more purpose-built tools like Procore and Autodesk have emerged to deliver on the course of construction. And we all know about the ERP systems downstream, but those are some of the business problems that exist. Like it used to tend to be a lot of Post-it notes, right? Where all the things I needed to follow up on and people I needed to call. And then it became real, and bidding and estimating become a thing where, okay, now we want to set it up in another system. We'd fill out a physical form. I mean, I was on a phone call with a team last week that uses like the 3 copy carbon, paper where you write it, tear off a sheet, put it in one person's inbox. The other copy goes here. And then what do? They clip it on their screen and then they type it into another system. And then, then they mark it off and go deliver it to the next department that needs to do that. I mean, I have many clients that still have processes like that or just recently got past that disposition. There's so many, obviously it's inefficient and painful. And can you imagine that being your job? But more importantly, like there's room for error there. And it's not happening at the speed of thought and helping people collaborate and get rallied around a job as quickly as they ought to be. So there's just no shortage of of business pain points, of technical debt, of room to just kind of roll up your sleeves and get to work on some of these things that need to get dealt with.
What size of companies are they? With these kind of problems that you just described?
$100 million in, $100 million in revenue, $300 million in revenue. US doesn't matter whether we're talking about that or the euro, but hundreds of employees, right? Sophisticated organizations that have established brands, that have really bright leadership. We're not talking about little startup companies that don't have the budget to solve this. We're not talking about organizations that are so big that they would be this titanic effort to try and move, right? We're talking about organizations that have the right size and scale to make the right investments and be nimble, but have been maybe just busy enough with other perfectly valid and important priorities to not push this particular thing forward.
But would that be, and you guys tell me where I'm getting politically incorrect, is it a matter of leadership being quite old and not being adaptive, and perhaps now there's younger people coming and thinking about technology more, or there's a different problem?
That's a little bit of it. I mean, here's the best example I see of that is you've got a leader in a particular function who just knows that they're only a few years from retirement and frankly has been through a big system implementation already once or twice in their career and is kind of like, that was particularly painful last time. I don't want to do it again. Or says, well, and this is the most well-intended version of that. Well, I'm the CFO. There's going to be a new CFO that we're going to pick in the next 2 years. And would it be fair for me to make the selection of the platform that they're going to be stuck with for the 10 years into their tenure? Why not let them have their own fingerprints on the tools that they pick, right? So those are the well-intended kind of good reasons behind folks waiting it out, more so than it is somebody being just completely rigid and immalleable in stuck in their ways, let's say. I really don't see...
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
A ton of that, but you see bits of that, no question.
I'm very curious. These companies like 100-300 million revenue, US, that you're talking about. CEOs of these companies, are they owners or like founders of these companies, or not necessarily?
I would say that's a 50-50 situation. Oftentimes they are. Not often, like, is it a single individual, that has 100% ownership and control? There tends to be a little bit of a decentralized ownership group. There's even some interesting models there related to like an employee stock option pool or stock option plan where there's actually hundreds of owners. That can be a little bit challenging to get everybody organized around making big investments. So it actually almost tends to be better if you've got a little bit more of a consolidated ownership pool, because they can get a little bit more rapidly. The decision making is not quite as decentralized, and so if we have the enthusiasm and the will to solve that problem from that single point, it gets prioritized, it gets invested in, it gets solved. But at the same time, we spend a lot of time making sure that we get the tools at our disposal to hand over that make the business case, right? So that's one of these ebook topics that I've got available is understand how the senior, right? Because this isn't always something that's a top-down initiative. It often is, like I said, coming from people junior in the organization, and they'll, this is a political savvy thing, right? You'll see them say, "Oh, I barked up that tree. I made that suggestion. I brought that up, and it wasn't acted upon, and so I don't know what to do," right? We kind of broke that down into a way that's a little more granular to say, we got to understand how the board makes decisions. How do they think about business cases? What are their standards for return on investment and how those things are financially modeled? So we've got an ROI calculator that helps put in what some of those costs are going to, all look like over what period of time, and then what kind of returns and benefits financially, and maybe some non-financial benefits are we, standing to see to make a business case that means that compared to an investment in a piece of equipment or a new office building upgrade, right? Or just imagine all the things that are competing for a finite pool of financial resources in a company. You can't just blindly go write big checks to tech companies and to consulting firms and expect that you're going to have those positive ROI outcomes every time if it wasn't well thought out. Right? We want this to be red team and the case to be beaten on to make sure it's a good one.
That's super interesting. So you mentioned ROI. Do you see ROI being a tangible number based on tech in the back office or on sites? Like which ROI are we talking about?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's certainly a combination of both. I mean, in some cases, you've got physical servers that need to be upgraded, right? Like you've got servers, and remember with servers, like that can be 6 figures to upgrade those things, and then that like they're going to age out compared to the cloud, which is just more of this operational expense that hits at a predictable rate every single month. So if you're thinking about a 6-figure server upgrade to keep an old piece of technology running, it's very easy to underwrite those ROI models, right? We say we don't need to write this big 6-figure check for the hardware. We're going to instead do that for software and for consulting. We get that thing up the cloud, then we've got a more predictable spend. That's easy. Organizations that already have all of their stuff converted to a monthly predictable OpEx and now are just going to something that's more expensive and a bigger outlay every month. We need to look a little bit more closely at whether they're people that are doing manual data entry and moving it from one system to another, or are very delayed in their project reporting, right? If they can improve their profit leakage on, every project or a subset of projects by a couple percentage points, what kind of improvement does that look like? And of course, litigation tends to arise if project delays exist. I mean, I tend to bring up with interns that come to WipFli this question of, hey, who knows about an apartment building that was being built for students on your campus that wasn't finished in time for the start of the semester in the school year? And they all raised their hand. They all know somebody that happened to. And I said, so what did the developer do? And they put them up in a hotel. Okay, how many units were in that building times how many students times $100 and some per night? What did that cost that developer when the deadline was missed? I have this buddy, a partner from WipFli that retired. His name is Tim. And he said, I don't know a lot about technology or a lot about projects, but I do know a lot about trains. And what I know is that bad shit happens to late trains. And so, it's just kind of a simple, thing to remember that the implications of things not getting delivered on time are significant, and any assurances that we can bring to bringing visibility to bad news, right? Letting bad news travel faster, get into the right hands of the people that can do something about it, that can find mitigations, tend to really quickly, underwrite and produce ROI.
Which company, and if I can sneak one more here, which type of company, or from revenue point of view, is more agile and eager to implement changes? 100 million or 500 million revenue?
I think 500 million. I think a little bit bigger tends to mean that we have a leadership team that is in a little less of a typical firefighting mode, that they tend to be thinking a little bit more about long-term durability of the business, long-term moat and competitive advantage, and just a little bit bigger base of like headcount and revenue to spread. Right? There are certain elements of these costs of these technology projects that are fixed, and certain elements that are variable depending on your size. And so you can just imagine that a bigger company just has a little bit easier time pushing those things and experimenting just a little bit, right? If you're a little bit on the, the smaller end of the spectrum, you tend to be a little bit more, all consumed with the day-to-day of working in the business and getting projects out the door. And you tend to just be a little bit closer to, different kind of risks that need to be, more carefully managed, where you can't necessarily go look for this outside risk, but I definitely do just as much with $100 million firms as I do with $500 million firms, because of the fact that $500 million firms so often have a reasonably capable team internally and whether they're correct or not about going at it more on their own. They tend to have the confidence to try and do a little bit more on their own. So I don't necessarily have a strong preference for a bigger organization. I enjoy a little bit of a balanced portfolio myself. And you can imagine, like, for me and for the clients that hire me and my team, like, they benefit from the perspective that we gain from organizations that were a little bit more nimble, and that didn't have all these kind of legacy considerations to worry about, right? The big firms have some stuff that they really got to be protective of and careful with. And then of course too, like, when the bigger firms are willing to do a little bit more experimentation, that can be something that 2 years later we can go deliver for the smaller firm for a significantly more conservative and known and tight financial outlet.
Ryan, would you say that there maybe is a little bit of disconnect within the whole construction technology ecosystem? Because how you are, you have like boots on the ground experience with companies that you deal with. I don't know how many clients you have, but you see a lot of the like inside out of how these companies operate. And you just described something which is probably one extreme of the problem, which is like getting rid of carbon paper to do your purchase orders or whatever they might be. Whereas on the flip side, you then have people who are building robotic solutions that can paint walls or build walls or whatever. So is there disconnect? Like, are the problems that people actually have, are they being solved by this technology, or is this technology more just sort of idealistic? And the reality of people using it, such as your clients, is quite a way off.
Yeah, I certainly love talking about robotics as much as anybody loves talking about robotics, especially humanoid robotics. And you guys have created a spin-off like channel dedicated to that. And I'm so thrilled that you did. And I'd like to be a contributor to that conversation. I think it is less of a dichotomy. Over time, I've gotten much more comfortable in a single conversation. I mean, last week I was up in Glenwood Springs, Colorado at the CFMA, Construction Financial Managers Association conference. And I did a main stage presentation, and it was a room full of people that are not at all thinking about robotics, but certainly hearing about it and probably rolling their eyes in some respects. And in that hour, I started with antagonizing the group around the importance of moonshots, right? Like, why do countries have a program like the US does NASA to go try and put people on the moon? Why did they do that 50 years ago? Why are they trying to do it again today? Why are they looking even beyond the moon at, right, the Moon to Mars program that exists, right? There's an element of inspiration and rallying people around something inspirational. And then there's actually some like scientific advancement and benefit that comes out of the exercise of doing it, right? And so to me, that's the place for robotics right this moment, is the inspirational element and the tinkering and the R&D element. But then it's not complicated to tie that back very linearly to where we are today, and appreciating that humanoid robotics concept 5 years ago was legitimately science fiction. Today, we know they're real. We know that there are like hundreds of these things, and we can pretty easily project forward to say 2 years, 4 years, 6 years from now that there are going to be thousands and that they're going to be everywhere. And what was the inflection point? What was the reason? Battery technology, supply chain getting developed around the physical components. And of course, LLMs have seriously changed the game there, because all of a sudden now, instead of needing to have deterministically programmed, and we saw this already with Tesla and how they completely changed the way cars are, right? It used to be look for red thing that looks like a stoplight. If you see it, stop. Now there's no deterministic programming. It's just generally, how did a human last behave in this spot, given all these data elements that we aren't even necessarily seeing with the human eye, right? Oh, the human didn't blow through that stop sign. Okay, good. And then there's, interventions, thumbs up, thumbs down. Did that go the way we wanted it to? So now let's think about that from a humanoid robotics on a job site perspective, which, I fully acknowledge that. I was joking. I was at my parents' house yesterday up in Wisconsin. Their Roomba was like 12 feet away from the base that it just left, and it could not find its way back, and it was stuck on seemingly nothing. Right? So we live in both of these worlds, but we can already talk conversationally to a phone or to an LLM and have it operate on our behalf. And the same thing is true of the humanoid robots. Now we can conversationally explain what we need done. We can send it a text message to tell it. We can send it a picture. It's got vision systems of its own. It can, when it experiences an exception, ask in plain English for, a human collaborator to give it direction on what to do to manage a backlog. So there is this element of disruption that no matter how big you are of a construction firm, if you aren't spending a small share of your time understanding what's going on with LLM. And so we talk about AI in two places, right? I mean, there's AI in the office. That's here, right? That's totally here. I mean, my email inbox, when I'm gone for a week, I can say on my team's Copilot, like, catch me up. What did I miss? What did I not follow up on? Who needs my attention? What's wrong? Right? I mean, it absolutely solves a lot of those problems for me every single day. I mean, LLMs completely are a part of my workflow and make me as productive and my team members as productive as they are. And I know people at construction firms that are getting those same benefits with regard to OCR and automation of boring processes that people don't want to do. And it's not a big leap at all to start to see exactly how that connects to humanoid robots in the field or non-humanoid robots, right? Purpose-built things that are helping with lifts and helping with safety and call out and, protect from falls. I mean, there's a lot of different forms those things are going to take. And so, so I've become very comfortable, Owen, to kind of tie it back to your question, saying, we've got these basics of, like, if our stuff's on paper and pencil, we're not going to get there. We need our stuff in the cloud. We need our stuff connected. We need our data in one place. And we need to be experimenting and building a culture of AI, and a curiosity around AI to have any feasibility of survival when our peers that are sophisticated and are ambitious and are willing to invest and take a little bit of risk do so and get there and succeed. Because how are we possibly going to compete if they get there and we're not on the journey yet?
I'm curious.
So what you mentioned earlier, like CRM. Sorry, mine. CRM is one thing that people have implemented. Like, what are some of the other things then that people that you work with implement and see like an instant benefit from?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe I'll just talk through the whole tech stack as I see it. So you kind of got the infrastructural stuff, right? I mean, you've got servers where we can actually keep files and obviously ideally getting those to the cloud, and email and chat and, just some of your basics. Then you get your business applications. So those are pre-construction elements, right? Bidding and estimating and building a pipeline and making sure we've got enough work. And the cool thing about CRM and pre-construction is, like, seeing into the future, right? And I think about that same thing when we think about BIM and VDC, right? We're getting a visual of the project into the future. We can take a timeline, that kind of 4D, 5D concept, and drag a slider and see the physical building getting, rising out of the ground, or or a construction project that's more horizontal in nature. We can see the costs materialize. We can see the hours of man hours on the job site materialize, and how the trades are going to interact and how they're going to try and eliminate, conflicts in the physical space. And then, like, how are we going to financially perform as a firm when we stack up all of our projects, and how are our people and our equipment resources going to be used out into the future? And so you're seeing a blend of that bidding, estimating, pipeline management, CRM, pre-construction packages with the course of construction delivery. And we all know now, so course of construction being, resource management and project management and quality and safety and RFIs and submittals. And then, the closeout and then the financial job costing. And that goes into the financial system. And we know that as ERP. So we kind of understand how, Autodesk and Procore have their benefits relative to pre-construction versus the course of construction, right? Like, they've got their niches there, and who's kind of doing that, and they're both kind of working their way towards and over one another's turf. And on the financial system side, there's some key players that are waxing and waning, there too, between Viewpoint and Sage and CMIC and then, some of the new entrants. Making those key apps talk is the more important part, in my opinion, than getting the exact one you pick, right? But I certainly would be picking one that's got sufficient R&D, that's thinking, that's got a big enough team, that's, has an experience that employees like, instead of, having a total science project that you hope you might be able to do as good of a job with. And then over the top of all of that, the thing that's really important to me is data warehouse and your data environment so that you can easily put dashboards over the top of that and do analytics. And this is a new area now where LLMs and Gen AI come into the mix, right? If you've got all your data connected in a place that's accessible, now we can start to use that as context. And there's a term called RAG. So when I'm on stage, I try to bring a couple terms to the surface for folks to really dig in on. I'm certain that RAG is a topic that some of the folks that you have on, and certainly a subset of the audience, is familiar with. But this to me
it's come up a few times, but I still can't remember what it means.
Retrieval augmented generation is what it stands for. And essentially the important concept here is that an LLM is actually kind of by definition, like hallucinating. Like that's what it's designed to do, is that you say a thing to it and then it's like going to just guess at what you want out of it. So if you just use one that was trained on the public internet, like ChatGPT, and you say, I've got a building that's going to fit on a site this big, and I want you to, estimate how much it's going to cost, and you give it very minimal context, it will come up with something very compelling around how that job is going to, financially, materialize. But like now just imagine you tell it what city we're talking about and, what the existing site conditions are and what our experience level is and how many subcontractors we know in that market, right? And so public data is already kind of baked into these models. And then it benefits if it can like kind of go look at the internet, and that's a version of RAG, right? The internet access version of ChatGPT is using RAG to kind of go get results and start to look at some more up-to-date information, not just stuff that was trained into the model. But where this is going to start to get really interesting and already is for anybody that's got Microsoft Copilot, but it's still early days here, is having all of our organization's data modeled in a way that's very accessible, that is like, our entire profile of all of our people and what their skill sets are, our project history, the subcontract relationships we specifically have, how we've done on jobs in that geography before profitability wise, how we've done on jobs from that owner with those same subcontractors that we're going to be working with based on those site conditions. And we're just talking about bidding or estimating here. I mean, imagine any other course of bidding a job, doing a job, trying to be profitable on a job, or just running your business more broadly. Forget about the actual construction process itself. Grounding an LLM in your organization's private data and being careful, of course, to not be feeding that in a way that's now going to end up in the model and that is now accessible to people that you don't want, is what I think my team will be thinking about as a key kind of outcome for the foreseeable future. Like, to the extent that we've been working on systems, implementations, integrations, analytics for the last decade, those will continue to be important as baseline inputs. RAG and LLM applications, I think, are going to be the key of the next decade. And we just think then about all of our interactions with systems becoming more conversational in nature, as opposed to hunting through user interfaces that people complain about. Being to do this from your phone, via text message, via chat, via conversation. That's what we're spending a lot of time on right this second.
Can you give a name of one or two of the companies that are work on this RAG and LLM application, who provide real services, or if there are any?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of this is still in an open source environment, more so than it is really effectively commercialized. But between Salesforce and Microsoft as two of like the big hypers, I think Salesforce isn't quite a hyperscaler, right? But even Amazon, they've got models and they've got places you can put the data. And so then, you can pretty easily imagine how you put that together. Now, like one open source framework that's used for this is called LangChain. So like LangChain allows you to connect to multiple models, connect to multiple data sources, point the models at the data sources. One of the other kind of like input components to this is you need a vector database, and you need something that does vector embedding. So that's what takes all your data that's like, let's say in SharePoint or here's another thing that gets interesting, guys, is like you get structured data and you get unstructured data, right? So structured data being things that fit in columns and rows, like are in your financial system, right? How did we do financially on prior job, or what's our budget for this coming job? We've got unstructured data like our chats and our emails and our drawings are kind of semi-structured, photos. all the correspondence. And so between, LangChain's one that I'd put out there. That's open source. They actually do have a for-profit company that got some additional tools.
And is it in construction tech, right? That's in construction.
I would say this is non-construction specific. Boomi is another platform that is designed to connect applications that seeks to serve as kind of a RAG capability that can point your agents at your underlying data. And then, of course, you've got the likes of Procore and Autodesk making big investments in trying to bring these capabilities right into the product themselves, right? So if you're in those applications, you got a little bit of a chat sidebar. You ask it a question, it's able to go into its system and connected systems. In theory, more so than in practice, right? As of October 2024, and surface for you what you need.
How do you see the future of those being developed by generalists like Amazon's, Microsoft's, or more by Procore and Autodesk, like you mentioned?
For the
construction use case.
Yeah, I think there's going to be two things that are happening right now. So one is every point application that's modern, that's got a real R&D team still, right? So just talk about Procore, right? We're going to definitely make, and Sage on the ERP side, or, NetSuite, or they're going to make investments in a co-pilot feature set and experience, right? That's going to make it so that you can interact with their application in a way that's conversational, because that's going to be expected, right? You're not going to be able to win in a competitive bake-off between two solutions if you don't have that thing. And those, I think that's going to increasingly be a part of the user experience we care about. Just like before, we used to have crazy menus and bad search. We had to go to the thing we wanted to search. Right? Do we want to search for jobs, or do we want to search for customers? We'd go there and then we'd search. And do we need to use the asterisk wildcard search, right? Like now there's unified search. And now there's unified, like I don't need to go to the menu to go do a thing. I just tell the thing what I want to do and it does it. Now, right now, the shortcoming there is if it just responds, if I put text in and it just responds with text, that's kind of a underwhelming experience, but it can respond with a card that's an actionable card that's got a little visual on it, that's got an input in it, right? Like called generative UI. That's how I see that playing forward inside these apps. But here's what gets problematic is we have 10 or 12 apps and they have all got their own co-pilot. And like, can the co-pilots talk to one another? And all of a sudden we got a new set of problems. Now we got all these agents we got to talk to. So I think what happens is we end up having a more unified, like there's just always this pendulum swing in tech, whether we're talking about construction or not, right? Towards, we've got one app that does all the things for our company, to this, we've got all these apps. Well, this whole Gen AI LLM interaction that we have is almost certainly going to be one that needs to be a unified experience. Like I just talked to this one thing and
super
it can
agent.
go.
Okay. It's just making my brain go to a few different places now. The discussion's really opened up.
Well, you can open up, Owen.
No, I really wanted to, we could go down this rabbit hole of language models and whatnot, but maybe for another time. I think that would be interesting to hear is, Ryan, when you are so obviously there comes to a point where like you're like, okay, I've noticed the problem. I think I know some good solutions which I would recommend that you guys go and purchase. Like, why do you recommend these solutions? Like, is there something? Is there a specific thing? Do you look at the team of people building it? Do you look at obviously how much it costs, what kind of return on investment it provides for the end users, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, there's this term you guys might have heard over the years, but it's like authorship is ownership. Like somebody is resistant to change if they were not, you're resistant to change that other people are imparting upon you against your will. And so part of this exercise is baseline understanding of their organization, understanding of what their biggest pain points are, zeroing in on the problem we're trying to solve. But with regard to how that solution gets picked, it's got to be a democratic process. It's got to be something where we, with them, take a look at the universe of options. We have a highly rigorous approach if one wants to go down that path, or one that's a little bit lighter touch. But an extremely rigorous approach would be build a scorecard. You weight that scorecard. You build a sophisticated RFP that conveys to the software company exactly what you're focused on and try and get them to hit on all those pain points, in a way that we prescribed. But forgetting about process and just focusing more on the really important part about buy-in. It's making sure that everybody that's in the company that wants to participate gets that opportunity to see the landscape of options and weigh in on which ones they see as superior for their unique situation. I mean, there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all answer to any one application. We do not, there are some that win more often for obvious reasons, right? They're priced right. They are, the most modern user experience. They've got the most promising roadmap. They've got the most compelling people that think they can get it operational fastest. Those are some of the things that tend to be weighted heavily and considered by the decision-making team, but it's got to be a democratic decision by the point of the team. If I come in and prescribe it, then it becomes the WipFli project. And the WipFli project is one where people can kind of decide whether they're on board with it or not. But if it's the, precision construction transformation project, they've taken their own ownership over those outcomes and are excited about getting their own thing right.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, we spoke about it a little bit earlier, and you mentioned a few things on this subject, but I wanted to get out of you is like, what was the typical problem with a medium-sized contractor 5 years ago? What is it right now? And what do you think it will be 5 years from now?
I love that question. I think 5 years ago, almost everybody was still using on-premise file servers, and so you'd go in and it was like, show me how a particular project is going.
You need an air-conditioned server room, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep. And, dusty. You just were actually worried about whether that thing was going to stay on and do what it needed to do. But the experience of trying to understand what was going on with the project required digging through emails, digging through folders, subfolders of the subfolders, opening the files, conflicted versions. I mean, that was pretty gnarly, right? Today, most organizations are in the cloud for the majority of their apps, but the problem is that they are not effectively connected. So we're not really good at, okay, we won a job and that's just boom, showing up in our construction management system and boom, showing up in our financial system, and the financial and project management data sets are really effectively synchronizing bidirectionally. There's kind of two sets of data you need to get synchronized across your apps. There's the master data, right? Who are my employees? Who are my customers and their contacts? What are the jobs we're working on? What are the cost codes and the materials? And right, those are the master data elements, and the transactions are the actual budgets and the actuals and the hours and the material utilization, et cetera. So iPaaS is a really emerging software category, integration platform as a service. I mentioned Boomi, MuleSoft from Salesforce, Workato. Those are some of the big players in that space that are making the apps talk. When you are in this world today where we're decentralized, many apps tend to exist in a construction company's environment. If we look back more 10 years, people are buying that one app to rule them all thing. Today, they're kind of no, I need the best estimating in the best financial system, in the best construction management system, in the best BIM and VDC environment. Looking forward, we spent quite a bit of time there. I think we're trying to get our data now replicated and modeled in a way that is kind of this lake house architecture. And we're looking not just at structured data. I mean, almost everything I talked about there was structured data. We're putting our unstructured data there. And then the lake house concept was pioneered by a company called, you'll hear me talk about Snowflake and Databricks. And then Microsoft has a tool called Fabric that is kind of that unified data environment. Those are your three big players there. Tagging that unstructured data, like the chats, emails, photos, videos, against what was the project, when was it created, who created it, all of those metadata elements are going to be very informative context for our LLM driven applications in the future. And I think our reporting and our analytics are going to be much more nuanced. Instead of just looking at right now, we can only build charts around data that's structured because it's you got to find a way to visualize the data. But what if we were just trying to visualize customer sentiment, right? Or relative quality or safety, right? You can go pick a a physical metric, like a hard metric, like number of reported near misses or, like results on a survey that we sent out. But what if we were actually just analyzing the tone of the emails between the owner and the leadership?
Less tangible
and we
things.
we could actually trend that, right? I mean, we could actually show how that moved up or down over time, based on like how many emails were written in all caps versus like had smiley faces in them, and we're discussing the next happy hour that we were going to be doing, or the ribbon cutting, or the milestones, and how satisfied we all were. So that's where I see us getting to, and I don't think 5 years from now, the robotics equation is going to be a future topic. I think it's going to be how are we dealing with this right this moment, and making it, that's a new integration problem all of a sudden, right? Like the best integration scenarios right now, like the most ambitious ones talk about IoT, like, oh, we could use temperature sensors and pressure sensors and, rain sensors out on the job site to understand the conditions. But like, in a few years, it's going to be more of an IO thing where it's like, okay, based on that, now like, here's what we want to feed for instructions to the robots that are working overnight to make sure that the job site's materials are organized in a way that when the people show up, like, we're ready to make more progress that day than we otherwise would have.
Speaking of robotics, I've got one last question here on this subject. Companies that you speak with or you spoke with in the last year or two, how many of them think really about implementing robotics, or just, asking questions about this without thinking about getting involved in adoption of robots?
Yeah. I mean, even on my team 12 months ago, this conversation was a little bit polarizing. And today, in the last 6 months, in the last quarter, it has become a much more universal consensus that this is here, this is happening. It's not here right this second, but it's about to be. And so if we're talking about the consulting and software tooling community, it's enthusiasm, because like, this is just cooler stuff to work on. I mean, like what we were doing 5 and 10 years ago was not really that cool. Right? I mean, why is construction tech? Why is it cool? Because like now it's cool, right? Autonomous vehicles and autonomous equipment is cool. If we're talking about the actual construction companies, their leaders, their people on the ground, there's a little bit of it's cool, and there's an equal bit of disruption and what our peers and our competitors might be doing right now, that if we are not doing, we stand to lose a competitive advantage with regard to how we price, how safe we are, how efficient we are, and what kind of jobs and conditions we can take on. So it's just really important. I think everybody's acknowledging the importance of that disruptive force and making sure they're on the right side of that disruptive force.
Okay.
Ryan, maybe one last-ish one as we're running out of time swiftly. If a company is listening to this and they're like, okay, love what you're saying about LLMs and LangChain and Databricks and Snowflake and all these funky companies, to them, that's probably like super esoteric. And they're like, oh my God, this is a lot. Are there any basic, perhaps first steps that these people could be undertaking today so that if they were to maybe think about implementing large language models or some type, would make it easier for them in the future?
Yeah, I believe that there's two things that everybody needs to be doing right now. The first is, like, if we're listening, we got to be personally experimenting with the tools. We got to be conversational with LLMs. I mean, I have family members that I'm an antagonist, as you can imagine, like, hey, open up your laptop for me, open up ChatGPT, show me something you've recently done with this. And I judge them based on that left rail. It shows like last week or yesterday or last month or
mine's kind of personal. I hope you wouldn't do that to me.
Yeah, fair enough with regard to the contents, but that's not what I'm interested in. What we're interested in here is the volume, right? Like, I hope that there's some experiment, because this stuff moves particularly fast. So that is all to say that instilling a culture of a culture around and a curiosity around data. And remember that we don't have a data strategy. We do not have an AI strategy. Don't talk to me about AI if there isn't some semblance of appreciation for and a plan around data, being in a place, being real, hygienic, up to date, right? We can't have a big mess of our data and expect that an LLM driven approach is going to be reliable and meaningful for us. But then again, that culture and experimentation and tinkering and envisioning the future state and researching the tools and staying on top of what's happening out there, what our peers are doing, what our customers have the potential, better experience based on, right? How are other industries applying these things? Like, I really don't think, that there is a persona, from a seniority level or a departmental perspective that has a good excuse as to why this is not a priority, that they need to be dedicating a real share of their time.
My last question would be, how do you and your team learn about construction tech and technology in general?
I think construction tech now is like a vertical of its own and a community of its own. But for me, when I think about what construction tech resources existed when I was passionate about this, that didn't exist. There wasn't a construction tech YouTube channel and publications. Mm-hmm. There were tech publications and there were construction publications, and you just spent enough time in both of those places and you could start to kind of triangulate what trends were coming from healthcare, financial institutions, manufacturing, as a few examples, that we're going to potentially benefit here. So, I certainly have the, privilege to get to fly around and spend a lot of time with conferences and talk to founders who are interesting and who are exploring the outer edges of these things. But YouTube is a pretty fabulous resource for folks that can't, easily, get on a plane and don't have access to senior leaders inside of, the coolest firms. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess everybody's algorithms are tuned to different things, whether we're talking about TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. And so, it's kind of self-fulfilling, right? You go in search of it, and then what do you know? It's kind of, it starts to find you.
Okay. Very interesting. Well, Ryan, it's been a pleasure. Look, we are almost bang on 60 minutes, 5 seconds left of that.
3, 2,
yeah.
1.
I feel like your phone might go a bit crazy for people interested in learning more about, or at least implementing some LLMs within their business. It certainly made me think a few things. So with that said, Ryan, could you tell our audience where they could find out more about you?
Yeah, you bet. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. So Ryan Rademann, I'm sure spelling of my name is right here, linkedin.com, and find that tag. I've got a profile on WipFli's website, so you can search for me there. So yeah, via Google is pretty easy way to find me. Super responsive via email. My phone's always ringing, so it's easy to get a hold of me, and I'm happy to be in touch. And definitely am more than willing to just spend time. I'm very giving with my time in terms of trying to understand an individual organization, what they're struggling with, what they're excited about, and very giving with regard to how I think they should kind of go forward. And those organizations know that we've got a team that can help at a deeper level if we need to roll up our sleeves and start kind of trying to contribute to that mission over a longer period of time. And so definitely really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to have me on and talk through some of this stuff today, and look forward to more.
Yeah, thank you for coming, Ryan. And you didn't mention that Green Bay Packers game.
Yeah, that's you can see the cheese head over my left, and a little nod to the green and gold. So I live in Bears territory down here in Chicago, but from Wisconsin, and definitely glad you guys got to experience a little bit of that over the pond this year.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.